Welcome to the Apprenticeship Diaries, where raw meets refined.
Let's be real, we're still working on refining.
What it took, what it takes, and the stories that are made.
Join us as we learn from professionals about how their stories began.
All right, we've started. What were you going to say? Say it real quick. I don't know. And then
I was going to say, have a signal for, sometimes I tell the long story. My husband has a little sign in the top of his toolbox. And it says, is this going to be long?
Well, assuredly on this podcast, it will be long.
All right. It's a diary, right?
It is, and it has to be, and that's why people come here. Is they come to get the diary entries and all the good little things that you don't get anywhere else. So with that being said, this is the Apprenticeship Diaries. I'm here with my good friend Carol LeBaron, and she's a textile artist. And I've been wanting this interview for a really long time, Carol.
Yeah, I can tell you know my name.
Called you Karen, the worst name in the world to call somebody right now.
What's that? Is that because I said I was going to have the long story?
I don't know. I think I combined Carol and LeBaron, and it became Karen.
Oh my God, never. Hate that. Just reel that right back. And at the end of this episode, no one will even be, after they hear both of us talk, the word Karen will be the farthest thing from anyone's minds.
Well, let's hope, because right now I'm calling the episode that. We're going to give them so much more. So I was reading through all of your, Carol is amazing because she answered all of the questions prior to, and I was like, no, we're going to go over them on the podcast. I just wanted to give you some pre-show notes, but it was nice for me that you did answer them, because I was able to kind of like go through what you were already going to say and kind of, and I thought it was all great information and that we can elaborate on. But I wanted to start with how you decided that this is what you want. I know that you went to school at RISD, and you had mentioned that you didn't, you hadn't done art before that. Can you talk about like what the journey was to like go from high school into RISD?
Yes, but it starts before high school.
Good. So go for it.
Yeah. So not that I'm going to say my whole life story, because I'm not going to say my age on, but so this starts when I was probably somewhere between 6 and 9.
Oh, wonderful.
And I had been writing some books. I wrote a book. My mother still has it somewhere. It was called Colors the Elephant. Had all these pictures of elephants in it, and it was all about you could be any color you want. And it was, the elephant. Nobody liked the elephant because he wanted to be all different colors, and all the other elephants were gray. I wrote this book when I was like 6, and I drew all these different colored elephants. So my parents decided I must have all this artistic talent, and so they took me to DeCordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Is a well-known place. They had a museum school there so that I would get some art education. So I had this art class, and we drew with charcoal, and I loved the charcoal. There was charcoal powder, and you could mess it all around and make. And so when the teacher came, she said it was terrible because I'd made too much of a mess, and I got in trouble for making a mess with this charcoal. So that was, and I didn't want to go back. I didn't go back after that, because all the other kids were doing what they were told and making these nice little drawings by erasing out. But I was in love with the marks that you could get with charcoal. I'd never seen anything like that before. I was just enamored with the material. I can still remember I just have this vague memory of the room and like all this charcoal dust. And I mean, I can only imagine what I looked like. That was one. And then the second one was at an after school camp a couple of years later. And plus I used to get in trouble in the art room because I never did the right kind of picture in elementary school. I kind of black a lot that out. But at this summer camp, we had to make trivets. And they gave you a piece of wood, just like the size of an iPad, and a bunch of oh, what do they call them? Upholstery nails, upholstery
Okay,
tacks, and a
yeah.
hammer. And then it had this little star drawn on it. And you were supposed to, I didn't understand this, but you're supposed to follow the star with the upholstery tacks. But I just got into the upholstery tacks, and I took as many tacks as I could glom, and I went off in a corner. I just started because I love the surface it made. I got into hammering the hammer, hammering the tacks down. I can still remember the same thing like with the charcoal, just
Right.
the brass tacks in the wood and what it was like when the wood came up around the tack. And next thing you know, I'm using too many tacks. I'm ruining it for everybody. I'm making too much noise. They took it away from me. That trivet, we still have it. It's up at our summer house.
Oh,
So those two things were enough to make me not want to do art classes unless I was absolutely forced to. So I never took any art in high school.
right.
And at the end of high school, I went on a hiatus, and I graduated in 72. So, the only reason I didn't go to Woodstock was because my parents wouldn't let me. I graduated young. I was 17, but I wanted to be a flower child, like you read about, and I had all the gear to do it. And I pretty much left. I took off and ended up with, I was supposed to go to college, and I went to all these college things and told them all I didn't want to go. I spent my last year in high school smoking marijuana instead of going to class.
I was going to ask, how were you in any other academic life? Like, what was it? Was it like the rest?
So I had 800s on my SATs, and I was a national merit scholar.
Yeah.
So they were
you
hoping to get me. Well, yes.
Yeah, you were just brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. And so, but of course, my parents wanted me to go to certain schools. And they took me around, and I can remember being at St. Lawrence in a leather mini skirt and suede boots with big heels. And they're like, "So why do you want us to go to your college?" And I'm like, "I don't want to go to your college." Because I didn't.
No, you're just like, I'm honest.
So I didn't get into any of those. So then, unbeknownst to me, my mother applied me to all the state schools, which I got into all those. It was a different world in 1972 than it is now.
Yeah.
And so I sort of took off that summer alone and just didn't come home, and then met my husband and went off with him to this farm, and we grew marijuana and lived in a little 6-sided house, and I took care of horses and wore granny dresses, and I made all my earthy crunchy, like ground all the grain for my homemade bread and grew all the food in the garden and did that. So that's when I decided that I was going to be a weaver woman. And I started reading about weaving the universe, in the threads of the universe. And I really identified with Circe, and with ancient weavers. And I was just really enamored with weaving. And so my journey started with studying weaving. And I've always been a weaver first. If the only reason I don't have a loom right now is because I don't have a place to put one. I do have a tapestry loom.
That's awesome.
That I bought for $200 from RISD, and it's in, Danny calls it the monster. It's in the attic of the shop. It's a big, huge, tall thing that's 6 feet tall. And yeah, so I can make rugs on that. So my first weaving that I made was a mandala. So I was weaving mandalas, doing Eastern art and all of that. I started selling those double weave bags at craft fairs. So that's my entrance into art again, was through that direction of creating things and wanting to become one with the universe through weaving, if that makes sense, and study of color, which a lot of those threads, is funny because I haven't thought about that in a long time, but some of the work I want to do now with people, I want to do some workshops with color and color exercises and tapping into your inner creativity and through color. And, that's a lot of the stuff that I was doing then at a time when I didn't even realize I was doing that. So at that time, of course, there was pressure from the parental units to go to college. So I took a bunch of art classes so that I could make a portfolio, because I had, I never did art. I didn't have anything for a portfolio. So I had to go, studied with a painter, And I learned how to draw. You had to make 3 drawings to get into RISD, pencil drawings. So I had to learn how to draw so I could make those drawings. I had to learn how to render. And I did that and got in as an undergrad. And I did textiles as an undergrad, and that was in the 70 and 80. I was there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years with my ex. But I got pregnant with my first child in my freshman year there, Kenneth, and he used to come to school with me in a snuggly, which just, I went into labor during a critique. I think that teacher was.
Oh my God. Jeez.
Oh yeah, he was a Japanese teacher. I think he was on like an exchange or something. His name was Akira Arita, and he was very straight laced. So, and it was on the top floor. So I was as big as a house. I used to tromp up there with my drawing boards and all this stuff. It was big as a house with Kenneth. And anyway, so I went into labor during the final crit in February of 78.
That is a story, man. My goodness.
Oh yeah, I have so many stories. But so, but that I had Kenneth, but then things were just, it's too long to tell it all here. It's all diary stuff. Like, I love that this is diaries, because this is a whole, for anybody out there listening that's struggling as a new mother or with relationships and art and trying to make all that work. I could fill 3 of your podcast episodes just with that.
Right.
Long story short, we moved out of that house into another one that he was going to fix up with somebody else. And the guy was a little loopy, and I was afraid of him. And I ended up saying I was going to leave and went back to my parents, of course, because I was only 18 or 20 or however young I was. And then from there, went to Smith, and that's when I started studying Eastern religions and printmaking. So those 2 things took me on this double trajectory with art, right? So it's not such a simple journey. And then there's recovery in there too, because by 1994, I was ready to get sober.
Yeah.
And so you can, kind of fill in the blanks on all of that. And I don't mind folk, but this is the first time so I don't need to get too far into those directions, but that's a huge part of my story.
Yeah.
And so when I was 2 years, 3 years, 4, 97, I decided to go back to graduate school, and we had to decide if I was going to get an MBA or an MFA. So we took a year. I was working with a career counselor person. First half of the year, I did the Princeton Review to try to do the because you had to do the GREs. And I scored off the charts on the verbal, but the math one, I couldn't get it. And even the teacher said I was the first person she'd ever taught that couldn't understand. I felt horrible. It was like the first time I'd ever been anywhere where I couldn't understand how to do it. It was, and I didn't have great scores, at least not to me. There were 600s or something for the math. And then, thank God, that 6 months was over. Then it was time to do the art. So I took art classes and made paintings. And I made probably, in 6 months, I made like 250 paintings and had an art show and sold them all.
Wow.
In Massachusetts.
That's
so
awesome.
We said, okay, let's go to RISD. So I made a portfolio out of all that. And that's how I ended up doing the MFA in textile design.
Right on.
Which was supposed to be a career in New York for some big company designing fabric. But somewhere on the line, it was really hard for me to reconcile my art with being on sheets. See, now I'm full circle and I want to design for industry. I'd actually, a lot of my designs would be fantastic for bedding and I can see it now where I couldn't then.
But I don't know if you would have had the same, if I can interject, I don't know if you would have had the same kind of portfolio. Like you wouldn't had all of this to offer had you gone straight into it. Besides the fact that you now have something that's, demands reverence because you are a professional. You do know exactly what you're doing through trial and error. You are an expert in all of these things, where if you had gone into it at that point, you probably would have had the same treatment that you got over and over again from all these institutions and places that were telling you, oh, you're doing this wrong. You need to do it like this and do it like this. Now you can come into things and be like, listen, man, I know exactly what I need to do. This is how we can apply it. And then you can be that kind of entity now that you couldn't be then. So I love that you didn't do that, actually.
So do I. And it makes me think, and I want to circle back to this because I want to talk about the apprenticeship piece.
Yeah.
But what happened to me was a gift from God in the form of a woman named Maria Tolokas. She's Finnish, and she was the head of the department then. And she saw what was happening to me. And she saw who I was and that I was a fine artist. Right. And it was a 2-year program, 66 credits a semester. It was really intense. You were there 12 hours. I got there into the studio at 6 a.m, didn't leave till 2 a.m. Wow. It was just really intense. And it was like being in the Bauhaus. But she took me in the fall of my second year, and she didn't allow me to work on fabrics for the whole first half of that semester. Wow. She made me paint.
Nice.
And then she said, okay, this is where you have to be.
I love it.
I love it. So I started developing the technique that I'm using now with like that piece, these pieces out here.
Which I love. It's so beautiful.
And I was doing one, I wanted to work, I love to work big. That's a small piece, even though that's to me small.
Yeah. And
so I was making these huge pieces, all one piece in great big giant vats. And in January, I was getting ready to make the big pieces for my Master of Fine Arts show. And I ended up with a double hernia from lifting all these heavy pieces. And I landed in the hospital, and I wasn't allowed to work. And they figured it out. They got me the elevator and all this stuff. And I had to make small pieces like this. So I figured out this whole technique that I've been using, 20 years. These are little pieces. So they all get sewn together. So ever since, I've been developing color and form and piecing them, advancing ways to piece. And it's a long story, but all the pieces are necessary and as you say, that 6-year-old, that person came back out in the beginning of that journey. Yeah. And to take it to apprenticeship, that's where I think someone, and I think it'd be like yourself too, somebody that is the artist's heart. If they have the right mentor, that's going to come out, and then they can pass that down the road. I believe that deeply.
Oh, I agree. And I also believe that there has to be a room, my heart cried when you were talking about making a mess in that studio and just playing with the medium and then being told that you were wrong. And again, with the making marks with the rivets and everything like that, I've experienced that in other artists, and it's really mentally crippling. It's very stifling. I've experienced it with myself too. Like when I got to college, there was one teacher who said that my watercolor style was wrong. He's like, it's too tight, you should loosen it up. And I was like, I'm not wrong. This is art. And this is art. You're talking about your preferences. Thank God I was old enough to push back. And I was in a place where I'm thinking mentally, I paid for this, dude. You don't get to tell me I'm wrong. And it was an illustration class. I was like, this isn't even about how I use a medium, bro. This is about me being an avid illustrator. Did I convey the concept? You don't get to tell me that I watercolor wrong now. I'm like, who do you think you are? And he thought he was a lot, but that was the thing, is that it really bothers me. And that is a seared thing to this day in my memory. And it's probably one of the leading reasons why I dropped out of college, was because when I started seeing that professionals in my field he was only one, but that there could be one like that. And in that place where, you need good mentors, you need people who are willing to take whatever you're coming with and put, like, just coach it in the right direction, and give you like little dream spaces to apply it to, and be like, okay, I see that you're really cool here. Let's put you over here because I think that this is going to be a great space for you. If you really enjoyed, charcoal like that, because it's in its powdered form, it's like painting and mark making. I would have like come in with as a teacher and like shown you how you can like make certain things with your fingers and stuff, and just let you get dirtier.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, your face is covered in it. Press your face up against. Let's see what that does. Like something like that. But that's kind of and I will touch back to your to addiction and everything. Did you find that art, because I know it is for me, did you find that was your place to go and atone and kind of work out a lot of the things with, like, it was that like your happy space where you were able to go and kind of like push out the rest? Or was it hard to come to your art during all of that?
The answer to that is, I'm going to be giving you the same answer. Yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. I wrote down your quote. I am
cool.
not wrong. This is art.
Yeah. Good.
That is that's going to go on a t-shirt.
Good.
So, and that's really kind of the answer to this, because what happened to me by the end was that I couldn't draw. I couldn't do anything.
Right.
I was physically incapable. I can remember some moments where I thought, oh, I'll draw a picture of this, and it wasn't, there was nothing there. It was terrifying.
Right.
Absolutely terrifying. And so when I first got sober, I couldn't. It took a long time. And it's a whole, I didn't even know I couldn't read.
Right.
I read whole books. I've read them since, and I never realized I never even read them. Like my eyes went across, it just never.
Wow. Registered.
No, it's very difficult to explain.
Right.
But I think it's not so much that art became my way to work things out, because I'm trying to think when I actually, 94, and I entered school in 90, so it's 3 years. Those first 3 years are really a blur. There wasn't, it's just you and then it was mastering, being able to do it, working through the fear. But yet here I am. These people see something, because just anybody can't get into this school.
Right. Right.
So the fact that I could create work so quickly, and the paintings, people responded to these paintings.
Right.
There's, and I don't even know where they all are now. Every now and then I see somebody has one in their house. I'm like, oh my God. Or I saw a lamp the other day that I made. I was designing lamps. I'm like, oh, that's really good.
That I did that.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
But then what started happening was, and as it became spiritual experience. Like I always pray before I work. Like when I'm in the studio, wow. I do. I say, help me, bring this, and there's a feeling that comes. I can't explain it. Like all of the pieces that you see, the piece that's behind me are made because I needed to make them.
Yeah, no.
They had to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest thing I've ever done is the commission that I'm finishing up right now, because the people had more specific requirements than I've ever. It was a huge learning curve and learning experience for me. because all those, and I didn't even realize that till we're having this conversation right now, that some of those voices are in my head. If somebody has a thought about this, maybe I'm not going to do it. Maybe I'm not, to align those two things. It must be that way with tattooing. It must, I mean, now that I'm thinking about that, my goodness, I can't, you're gonna have to tell me about that. But so now the stitch meditations that I do, and if you have, I don't know if you've gone through my stitch meditation thing.
I've looked at a couple of them. Yes. They're very cool.
So there's one that you actually can follow the meditation, like you sit, but you have to actually sit there and stitch and meditate. And that practice does bring me into that zone, working on the colors, being in the dye room with the dye pot. Like I call it circling, and I'll go to the studio and I'll touch this and I'll touch that, and it's like a whirlpool.
Oh, cool.
And then I'm underwater, and I'm just down there. I don't know, or under there or in there or whatever it is.
Yeah. I call it I always call it my God sense. I always call it like it's like a linking with the collective conscious. It's like you're letting it funnel through you and kind of just feeling it and letting it guide your actions. Like there isn't a lot of thought. There's just reaction. It's just like,
yes.
Yeah. It's that part. Have you ever seen the movie Last Samurai? I always bring this up, where he's trying to teach him how to fight with a sword, and he's like, too many mind, no mind. Like,
I think I have.
Yeah, that part, that's what I always try to tell people. Like, that's what it has to become. It's like you're given this and you respond. You've given this and you respond. If you get into thinking about it, you're paralyzed. Like you can't. It stifles the action, like, because then you gas yourself out before you're even start. And it is the same with tattooing, because when people ask about, I mean, this is just a fraction of how that applies, but people always ask, aren't you scared because you're tattooing somebody forever? I was like, if I were to think about that before I did it, I would never start. I was like, you don't think about those things. You have to kind of go to a place and kind of turn off the rest of the noise and just kind of funnel in and just respond. And that's what I felt for you when you were talking about being a kid, is like, you let those things just naturally flow through you anyway. And you trust that it's right. Like you said, it's art. I'm not wrong. Like that is a thing. I'm not wrong. Like this is, I know what I'm doing, and I'm letting it happen because I know that it's right. And I would imagine that, like, being that person just so young, and even your book that you had, which I think is a lovely thing. I think that book should exist, about the elephants, just recognizing that so young, and all of those things. It's, I would imagine that's what kind of led to the addiction, because when you feel that disconnected from other people, I just got done listening to Russell Brand's Recovery, and he says in there, if you have at all the feeling that you are different from other people, this book is for you, because recovery is about reconnecting you with what you really are. That's what the recovery is, the recovery of your real self and what you're meant to be on this planet, what you're meant to exude and drive forward. So if all of your expressions up until that point had been slapped down, and all these people saying to you, like, no, you got to do it this way, like this is how you have to do it, I would imagine that would be a very lonely state to be in, and where you would probably feel like you had to numb from your experience in order to just cope, because so many people telling you that you're wrong and you're like, I'm not wrong.
Yeah. In my family, it doesn't fit. It's a curse and a blessing.
Oh, it is. I agree.
Because I have a lot of friends that just can't stand the way I talk. They're like, why do you use all these long words? Why do you?
I love it.
Yeah. But there are people that think you're talking down to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know.
quite a few people, you probably experienced the same thing.
I have. I've told them we've confronted it. It was really cool, actually. A former apprentice of my father, she was like, Amy, I was very intimidated by you because you use a lot of big words. She goes, and I grew up on a trailer park, and I didn't really want to, it was hard for me to talk to you because I didn't understand half the time. I said, well, why didn't you just ask me? Like I was, and she goes, well, I didn't want to be seen as stupid. And I was like, well, hun, the thing of it is that that's a good way to stay there and stay in that place. And I said, and also there's a really amazing thing that you just didn't think about. I said, because what if I'm talking out of my ass? What if I don't know? If you ask that question and I don't know what the hell I just said, if I can't come up with like that, a definition for the word I just used, you have just pinpointed the bullshit. And I was like,
how often that's happened to me? People say, what is, and I look it up and I'm like, oh, 9 times out of 10, I am using the word properly.
Yeah.
But it's more that it's here that I don't know. So I learn more from people say, what does that word mean? Now look it up. Oh yeah. And here's the context. But of course, then I find myself putting it in a sentence and giving them a lecture, which irritates them even more. So that's the downside to that. But
I did it forever with lascivious. I thought lascivious was just like ill intent, but I didn't realize it was specifically a sexually charged ill intent, which I didn't realize until I looked it up.
I can only imagine the looks you got from that one.
I know. And I was like, I didn't realize, I mean, who knows who would have known and who would have dared question me, right? Because if the majority of people don't ask questions and they just assume if you're bold enough to say something that you know what you're talking about, that's something I learned. Yeah. Now everybody knows lascivious, but I was using it wrong for a long time until I was finally like, my boyfriend asked, he was like, what does that mean? And I looked it up and I was like, oh shit, I've been using this wrong the whole time. Like, this is crazy. I was like, I didn't know it was that, but yeah, like my background is that I had a struggle learning to read early on. I think I'm dyslexic. I think that's part of my kind of learning curve. But because of that, context was huge. I was smart enough to like link together the words I knew and contextually put it together. So whenever it comes down to words and things like that, I always respond to context. I always like listen for context clues. And so that's what's been able to connect me with a lot of the ability to understand people and situations and language. And I mean, I don't know any language except for English, but I would imagine that my ability to formulate context really helps. But yeah, that's where it happened for me. But I was not out the gate like verbally a master. I had to really work for it. But I think that's why. I think that when the thing that I love about you, and I do want to mention this before we move forward, we met on the Nomad Network through Jason Stapleton and his podcast, and that's kind of how we met. But that since day one of meeting you, Carol, you're just somebody that I've always linked up with as far as like philosophy, anything that like, when we were talking about NFTs, when we were talking about anything, you and I were like in sync. We were like, well, this is why we think this would be problematic, because we're thinking about it like a million years from now when we're dead in the ground. But our philosophies really run hardcore. Like I feel like a kindred, like soulful connection. So like that's where we really came together, and it just keeps expanding. And ever since I keep hearing about you, I'm like, I gotta get her on my podcast because everybody needs to know Carol. But yeah,
well, it's my debut, so
I know
I've
it's
never
awesome.
been on a podcast before.
I know, I think it's awesome. And so going back to what you had said, so I wanted to touch on it because I know I've heard a little bit more about this journey where you had the hernia and you had to make these smaller portions. What is it was like an Eastern technique, right? That you learned in that space?
Yes. So it came out of it was a materials project that we were all given, and we were the they asked us to design a new process or a new way of using materials. And I'm all about color. So I was looking for ways to get color onto wool.
Right.
Because over the 2 years that I was there, all of the dyeing that I did, we dyed every single type of dye imaginable. I know how to do them all. And there's different kinds of dye for every different kind of fabric that there is. And the acid dyes on wool, the color was just so much richer, so much more intense than any kind of color that I could get on any other material. And over the years since, I found out that there's multiple reasons for that besides just the dyes. It has to do with light, it has to do with the absorption, it has to do with the structure of the fiber, the way it absorbs and reflects light, all of those different things, the way it takes the dye, all of that. But dyeing by its very nature is an additive process. So if you want to have, like, if you look at the piece behind me, well, actually, none of those are a really good example. Here we go. This is probably, here we go. Here's a good example. See how there's blue in the middle of this, orange on the outside?
Yeah.
Well, if you think about watercolor painting, how are you going to get that blue there? You can't have the orange under it.
Right. Yes. Because it'll just mud out.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't paint fabric the way that you paint. You dye it. It goes in a pot or you screen print it or something. Now with cotton or cellulose fibers, with the dyes you use for those, you can actually do a process that's called discharge, where you can remove the dye.
Gotcha.
So you could dye the whole thing orange.
Right.
And then you could
stamp
and strip the dye from that area and then go back into it with the blue.
Gotcha.
But on the wool, you cannot. The nature of the fiber is such that you have to, if you try to discharge the dye out of the wool, the stuff that you'd have to do it with eats the fiber, eats the material.
Right.
Makes it just nasty. So I had to find another way. And at that time, shibori is the name of the technique, and it wasn't known then like it is now. You got to remember, this was 22 years ago. And there was a woman, Yoshiko Wada, who had just done an extensive study in Japan. She'd taken all the gone to, I think, which museum it was. I think Kyoto, but don't quote me on that. I have to look it up. If she ever listens to this, she'll be like, oh, because I've studied with her. I've taken a workshop with her. But anyway, I forget what museum. But anyway, she took all of the original Edo period and period historical textiles, and she figured out how they did them all. And she recreated that, and she put it all in a book. And that since then, that over the 20 years, that became popular. It filtered into the culture here. Right. But it was a new thing at that time. And I saw that technique, and I saw how so one of them is called itajime, which it's using wooden clamps.
Right.
And so that I'm like, oh, I can take the wood and make it into shapes, and I can keep the color away from the shapes.
Got you. I got you. Right on.
So my original large pieces were done the traditional way, only just really big with wool. And there were just two colors. I've got a blue and white one somewhere. I'll throw it up onto the network so you can see what it looks like. It really looks like indigo, because they it was my first pieces. I was just trying to recreate what they did.
Right.
Some of the techniques, but then I kind of branched out from there. But then I couldn't do those because of this stupid, I wasn't allowed to lift anything heavier than a pound.
Right.
So, and I didn't want to sew with the machine because I hated the way the stitches looked. And I've never been a sewer. I had no interest in sewing, stitching. No. I want to dye. I didn't want to sit there and sew. but now I kind of had to recover from the surgery. So it was like a good activity for me to do. So, I don't know, the creator, whatever God decides, we're going to, you have to make the most out of the situation you're in. So I have a line that I love to say, how a double hernia helped me make artwork that it now exists in hotels and hospitals across the world.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
So that's what the story is. Yeah. So now the last piece I did, it's all made out of little tiny pieces that are like this.
Oh, wow.
It's 15 by 8 feet, and they're all these little tiny things sewn together.
Wow. That's
and it's taken me 5 years. So, I mean, I can't keep doing this. It's not sustainable.
But I think it's amazing. I mean, that piece is going to be epic. And think about because I think that, not to get too woo-woo-y with it, but I think that things get charged with that creative energy, and they exude it for all of time. So it's going to be a very powerful piece. It is.
Yeah. It is. You'll see it one day.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about that. And like with the sewing kind of thing, I mean, you said that like you started out as a weaver, it's still weaving. It's still,
Yes.
Yeah. So I like that. Not to mention, it's a very intimate connection with your piece. And there's that process, like I think real artists are process oriented. We're not product bound, even though there is a product in mind, and we'll know when we hit it.
Mm-hmm.
But we lose ourselves in the process. And that's where we find all the joy, that rhythm, like it's just so nice. Like you said, it's like it isn't nausea inducing like a whirlpool, I guess would be, but
maybe it is.
It probably is for some. I have a lot of people that look over my shoulder like, I don't even know how you do that. I'm like, I don't know either. I just let it happen. But so after school and everything, how you did have this plan to go and work for companies doing textiles. What took off after that? You found this technique, you started leaning into it. What was the course after that?
Well, then they asked me to teach them surface design classes.
Oh, okay.
So I taught,
Right
and
on.
I really loved it. So I kind of did a 180, and everybody advised me that I was never going to have any money, and that I really should just go into industry, because which actually turned out to be true, but that's,
But you had passion.
I had passion, and I'm not sorry. I teach workshops now at craft schools when I can. I'm going to be teaching one actually next spring.
It probably made you a better mom too, I would think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. But so I just kind of did a 180 and applied for teaching jobs out of school. And that's how I ended up in Tennessee. I had a choice. I got 2 offers, one in Pennsylvania, but it was for a temporary full-time position for 1 semester.
Mm-hmm.
And it was out in near Pittsburgh, whatever that university is out there in Western Pennsylvania. Big school. I forget the name of it.
I'm sure.
And then the other one was East Tennessee State.
Right on.
And which was also temporary full-time. But it was a year position. And they were talking about that the way I didn't know about academics
Mm-hmm.
than what I know now, that you have to like basically prove yourself every second. And I didn't know that. I just thought, because I did not get any, I don't know if RISD's different now, but then I got all of the art schooling, all of that, but nothing about how to actually exist in the world, nothing about how to deal with people, which is not being in like a environment where there are other people all working and everybody has an agenda and you have to watch where your feet go. I didn't know how to do that, and I'm still don't.
I'm figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning a lot. This Nomad network's really helping me a lot, working with people, just learning. I just learn a lot from people. But So I ended up being there, getting my contract renewed for 3 years. But the other thing that happened was the year that I went down there was 2001.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never been south of the Mason-Dixon line. And I'm down there all alone. And, because Danny, we didn't realize we should just kind of wait. We moved everything down here, lock, stock, and barrel, which, it's a lot cheaper to live down here. And I love it here. So it's good. But so, we had 1 week to find a place to live and figure out my classes starting, because we came down in August, because I graduated in June, had to wrap stuff up. And so Danny's in Massachusetts, packing our gear and bring it down to our temporary housing. And I'm teaching, and then it's 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I never forget, I was hiking with a new friend. We were up on top of the hill in her yard, and all of a sudden her daughter comes running out of it. She was in a trailer at the bottom of the hill. She comes running out. She goes, Mama, they done gone bombed the World Trade Center. She's like, just like that. I'm like, it was like, what? She was like, and it was Phyllis and I, we went down and it was that. And I was 1,000 miles away from everybody I knew.
Yeah.
My sister was in Manhattan when that happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I had a class the next day. I remember I went and bought a whole bunch of canned good, took some money out of the bank and filled up the car.
Right.
You're like, yeah, and bought a bunch of bottled water, filled the bathtub too.
Yeah.
Because I was always taught to do that in a storm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because I'm alone, I've never been alone like this. And so I went to at an 8 o'clock color theory class the next day.
Wow.
So I went to school and the classroom was full. All the students were there. And I looked at him, everybody's like looking at me like, what are you going to do? And I said, we're just going to do color theory. Because if we don't, they win.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from, but that's what I said. And they're all like, okay. And we did our work. That's what we did.
I really think that's the best thing you could have said as a teacher and mentor at that point. Like that's like the best thing to say.
Yeah. It's that, that's the only thing I could think of. And then, of course, in the next 2 days, all the boys ended up, they all went to Fort Campbell. There was only girls left, it was literally, where I am, they had the very first person that went to Iraq was,
wow.
was Dan, somebody or other, David, or I forget what his name was. But anyway, he was like this area, very much my mother sent me an American flag. The one that my grandfather was a commander of a ship in the Navy. So they had a flag. She sent me a flag to put in my window. Wow. Everybody had a flag in their window.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. That's crazy, man. I was in an art class when that happened. I was in a illustration class when all of that went down, and I remember somebody coming in and we had a TV right there. Everyone turned it on, and we experienced that all together as a classroom. So you were teaching, you weren't teaching, you were hiking, but you had to go to a class, and I was actually in a class while that was happening. So it was impactful. And I do remember a lot of my classmates, they were from New York, and they were like panicked, and the teacher was like, you're excused, whatever you have to do, call your family, all of that. So it was a huge thing. And most people, like, your memory gets, seared with those things, because, everybody has like what they were doing.
Right.
But I remember just being in class and just watching everyone, because it was, I was just kind of like, what are we doing? What's next? And
exactly.
I kept on going with my day and just listening. But like, I knew I was kind of like you, and instinctually of just being like, I got to keep going with what my plan is. My plan is to be this artist. My plan is to be this person. You know, it was very, I guess it's that same kind of turnkey that I'm able to have when it comes down to sitting to my art. You know, like I just have to take the noise out and focus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But that's crazy, dude. So from
It
there,
affected my career though, because
yeah.
well, they didn't have funding for the position then. Like things changed a little. They didn't offer tenure. They couldn't offer I couldn't apply for it. I was supposed to be able to apply at the end of that first year.
Crap. Okay, so that's cool. Good. Get back on the course here because we got to keep going with Carol.
But that's how 9/11 affected me.
Yeah. Wow.
Just like this COVID thing now, it affects everybody has their personal story, how it affect them, you know, financially, spiritually, physically, you know, 9/11, same thing. And then what was that? 2001.
20 years ago.
20
well,
years.
More than
That's not that long.
21. Yeah.
20 years is not very long.
No.
And there are people that don't even think of it. And, you know, back to talking about the long view. And of course, the older you get, the more you realize how short a decade is.
Yep.
Is the point. So it was kind of a gift because by the end of that 3 years, you know, I need a lot to do. I mean, I got major research grants. I got, you know, I did a lot of things while I was there. So by the time I was trying to apply, everybody said my application looked more like a tenure application than a new client. And there were people that already didn't like me. And I was, you know, it was like, I didn't follow the instruction of just go up in your office and don't do anything till it's time to apply, you know, which I guess is a thing, not just, you know, in a lot of places, I guess that you're supposed to stay low. I don't know. I think that's something that happens in the world, but I really don't know because I have so little experience. So I don't know. Now I'm saying this like out loud and the whole world's going to hear it. That's scary, but it's a diary. So we get real, right? So I'm being real there. So the gift that I got out of that was low income. So I could never really own anything that I could lose.
Right. It does help,
and,
honestly.
And we still rent our house. And I didn't end up in that one place where I had, you know, I still have to, you know, had to struggle. And I did a lot of teaching in a lot of different schools. I've had a long career, several different universities. I've been to Scotland with my, you know, I've been all different places.
Wow.
Probably more places than I could have gone. I don't know. I love where I am right now. I am really, really happy right now.
That's awesome. I love that. I love hearing
and I'm
that.
really excited about where, like, I'm just excited for this year. I'm excited to try to bring people in to work with a few people. You know, I don't know where they're going to come from, but, you know, I had somebody that's working with me now, and you know, you do these little surveys and to find out, you know, what. So the question that we were supposed to ask was in this little, you know, workshop thing I took. Ask people who are working with you, which part of your life does this make better? Business or spiritual or health or personal growth, or there was one other one. And so this lady answered almost immediately. She goes, well, it's spiritual. I'm teaching her art. I was teaching her kids art. And then she liked the session so much that when the kids went back to school, she started studying with me. And it's just like this one-on-one, like we're talking about apprenticeship type of thing.
Yeah.
And she says, well, it's personal and spiritual growth, but they all would fit.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And I think for you, you know, with your apprentices and the people you work with, it's that feeling that you can make a difference in somebody's, you know, that this is one place where she can go where it's just for her and she can be creative.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, and I'm sure you have that yourself.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I absolutely. The collaborative piece of where I'm at right now is really, really exciting. I've existed off of that with my clients, you know, with every single one that I have, because my artwork is is kind of, I need the person to be the conduit, because I am an illustrator. I'm just a very personal illustrator, and what I seek is the personal story. And so what I want is all of these things that you come to me with that kind of illustrates the idea of you. And then I help you realize that in a very, very, personal brand kind of way. You're going to be wearing it and other people are going to be engaging with it. So yeah, like all of that stuff is, but now I'm like you, I really want to, I didn't start out teaching. I knew it to be a very high tier thing that you do when you want to promote legacy. And that has always been a thing that my dad spoke about when I was doing my first apprenticeship, which was in hair. He was like, when you love something, you teach it to somebody else. That's how you make your mark on this world. Like there's so many different ways to do it. And my parents long knew that I didn't want kids. So they were like, I think that was an important thing for them to let me know, is that like, you always have to interact, and a tempering thing for me. You have to think about how you're impacting the world and what you're giving to the things that you love, because it matters. It's a character building thing. So they were like, you should think about it. My dad's now saying like, I think you should teach art. And I have to admit, I'm a little, COVID has rocked me in a lot of ways. And I think the thing that I'm going to do right now is really focus on being the best tattoo artist I can possibly be right now, and just really getting strong there, because that's the base. I don't really feel like expansion is something I can do right now. This is the first time this is going out. It'll be, in a few weeks from now, but I did have to actually part ways with my current apprentice. It was very, I think, mutual, but it was something that where I felt like I couldn't help him anymore. And I felt like I was a bad space, honestly, for him to be in that particular incidents that happened with us. I just couldn't get past it, and it kept me up at night. And I was like, I think this is his time for me to like, put an ultimatum out there for him and let him decide whether or not he wants to continue learning from me or not. Because this is big for me, and I can't move past it if we can't coalesce into a mutual understanding. And, it was something that I do think that it was a time, and he picked the right choice, which was to move on with his education elsewhere, which I think that's part of the journey. Like you said, think about all the things. I mean, you started out 6 writing a book, and then like, all the things that you've gone through to get here and be so happy, but that's the thing. That's why I wanted all of this, the Apprenticeship Diaries, all of this stuff to be something to let people know it's not a straight line. Like even if what you're going into, like you said, I studied weaving, and then, it took me here, and then I had this medical issue, and then it took me here, and then there was 9/11 and it took me here. Like it doesn't happen that way. We have it in our heads that it's going to, that we can structure the plan, and it's not a bad idea to have a plan. But I think you have to be willing to, again, view life as a process-oriented thing. You cannot think about it as a product, because then you're always going to feel like something's lacking. Like you have to just fall in love with the play and the process, and like, oh, well, I didn't think that would happen, but we're just going to go over here now. And if we don't do color theory today, they win. So, I love it. I love all of that. So, since you couldn't get tenure, what happened? Like I, now you're doing this huge commission, I know, for this client. It's taking you 5 years, but like, how has, the path to professionalism looked for you? Like, how did you because you said most of your art's in a museum right now. I don't think many of the artists that are listening here can say things like that, and that you've designed for hotels and things like that. How did the evolution of that happen?
So it's a good thing that this isn't going to be the only talk we have.
Right? Well, there's a lot more.
This is going to be long. No. So what happens is that you put your work out there looking for shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I literally, up until 5 years ago, I promoted and I had a show somewhere every single year because because I wanted to have a reason to make the work. So, I mean, and
cool.
So my last show was 5 years ago, and one of the people that came there that saw the work bought this piece. And so then I've been working on this. So I have probably 30 pieces that most of the world has never seen because they were just at this one show. So unless you got to go to that, you wouldn't have seen it, because that was before COVID. And then it took me forever. I guess maybe it was 2016. I don't know, but we put the pieces were in storage there. They were going to bring them back out to me, but then they couldn't. Then I couldn't get there. I think my father died in between there. So no, it was before that. I don't know what happened, but somehow they're still there. And then, of course, when COVID hit, everything shut down.
Yeah.
So the pieces were still there. I've got to get them out of there. I got an email from Terry Jordan saying, she's got 30 big paintings coming in and she needs a place. I said, I'll come out and get them.
Right.
Said, let me know. I'll come get them, because I was going to deliver this big piece I'm working on. And but we need a scaffold to stage it. We've got to stage it. It's going to be dimensional. So I got to stage it, figure out how we're going to hang it, what I got to do to it. That's going to come down again, get worked on again, and then go back out there.
Right.
So it's not, they don't want to have that scaffolding up over Christmas.
Gotcha.
So I'm getting there. I know that I got. So anyway, I had art shows and people would see the work. And I also, put out proposals, and because I was teaching in academia for those 3 years, and then after I taught there, I would pick up classes at other places. I also I'm part of Surface Design Association. I taught workshops at Penland, at Haystack, at Arrowmont, a lot of craft schools that are well known, John C. Campbell, and so different people would see my work, and then I would get a commission.
Right.
And I also had so I'm part of the Tennessee Art Craft Association, and I've won prizes for a bunch of my work, and one of those was in the State Museum in Tennessee. The governor saw my work. I ended up making curtains for the governor's mansion, like weird stuff like that.
That's awesome.
That was a volunteer thing. I didn't get paid for it. And it was weird because they were rare. I had to dye this fabric they gave me. I had to figure out how to dye it. But anyway,
That's
so
awesome.
Tony Sykes owned like a marketing type thing, and she saw my work, and the work that won the prize in the State Museum, and we collaborated on advertising it, and some clients saw that, and it's been really the amount of commissions that I've gotten just because people happen to see my work without me really advertising it.
Right.
When I kind of think about it, it's kind of amazing.
Well, I think that's the thing too, is that what a lot of people don't understand is that I feel like, and this is something that we learn on the Nomad Network, you think that if you don't get mainstream enough, that nobody will, lash on. And really the encouragement where we gather is niche out, man, like be as authentic to you as possible, be this rare gem of a human, because in my experience too, the more that I do that and the less that I really allow for a lot of external influences, the more I get the qualified purchaser of my art, the more my clientele really becomes what I need it to be, and this perfect fit kind of thing, like because they see the work and they respond, they'll see it on someone else. And then I have this whole word of mouth kind of thing. I don't advertise. I have my portfolio up on IG and I show that kind of stuff off, but I don't advertise. I don't pay for it. I don't, I talk about my work. I interact with people, but it's all word of mouth. And I've gotten that ever since doing hair. People talk and then they see the hair and then they see the work and they talk about you and then they send people. And I find that when people find you that way, that very neat funnel, they just get qualified because they're willing to go through the journey. They kind of love the journey too. And then you have this perfect client relationship that's pretty awesome. So I like that a lot. Can you share with the listeners a little bit, because not a lot of people know about the gallery life and everything. Can you talk to them about what it is to approach a gallery, what that situation is like and all that good stuff, because it's a lot. And most people don't realize what a gallery, working with them and your work is kind of like. And there's a whole commission part of it too. That's a part of that interaction.
Yeah. So as far as the gallery piece goes, I've never actually gotten representation with a specific gallery.
Okay.
I think it's because my pieces take too long to make.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to charge too much. And a gallery, they all of the galleries, first of all, it's better now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a line, like textile art isn't always seen the same way painting is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's much more accepted, but of course 20 years ago, so there was that people didn't understand what my art was,
right?
Or even what to call them. Like they'd say they're tapestries. They're not really technically tapestries because they're woven.
Yeah.
So I didn't, and frankly, I wanted to sell the work, but I couldn't make enough pieces fast enough. So, but where I have worked with galleries is in shows. So the type of gallery, like galleries that give you shows, or they'll put out call for artists.
Right. And collections.
Answer calls for artists. So that's been my experience, my just going through creating getting the slides made. So
well, it's a good point to mention.
Between the year 1999 and I can't say what year it was, but it was after, certainly while I was still in school, we would have slides.
Right.
And I have 4x5 transparencies. Like I'd get 4x5 transparencies for my work.
Yep.
And that's what you needed to send to be published. I've still got, they needed the 4x5s to publish, is what I'm trying to say, is that, so you had to get them photographed. You had to pay a photographer because the photographer had all the lighting and all of that for photographing your work. So, and then digital images, they would do digital photography, but the last professional photography that I had done of my work was probably 2014 when I was after Georgia State. There was one last show, and then of course at the Customs House I got some pictures, although they weren't really what I would have wanted. There's this in-between transition time where you got to figure out how to get your work photographed. My work's really big. Yeah. And so I have work that hasn't been photographed, that now I have to do it, because it's like, really now the way, it's not like, I mean, you can find a photographer, but I might, I have all the equipment it's different.
Yeah.
Like it's just different, a different world. So most of my experience was learning. The talk would have been, well, you have to have good slides. You have to make sure, your slides need to be clear. You need to have the right size. You have to have high resolution images. You need to make that portfolio so they can see a variety. You have to do exactly what they ask for. You send the slides. Sometimes you'll get accepted into a show just because your slides are clear. They know exactly what they're getting.
Right.
they're not sure what it is they're getting. They might be beautiful work, but they might not accept it. So that, anybody who's listening, I will say that the photography is really important. And it's a place where I've been given a gift of some camera equipment last year that I'm learning how to use that will photograph my work, but I don't have all the lights and everything I need yet. It's
right.
But so that's a huge piece of it, is figuring out how to get your work in front of your audience. And now it's a whole new thing because you've got to do it. There's new online programs. There's whole new ways to do it. And this is something that I'm just at the beginning of right now. Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely. Because, no, well, and it gives a perspective on how much harder it was too, because now I have this one, it's called the artist list, and they give you listings of different competitions and things like that go around you, and what themes, like you said, what shows are going on. And now you can just, if you have a good scan of your work or a good photo, like you said, you just email it in, and it's bam, bam, bam. And everybody, they're able to sit there and easily assess your work, gather the information. But before, it was a process. I remember when I went to college, I needed slides. I needed to have slides of my work in order to submit a portfolio. And you had to learn how to, my art school, they taught you how to take slides, how to photograph them, because they had the equipment there. I went to a magnet school for high school, so mine was very concentrated in art before I went to actual college. So I had to learn how to take slides, and then you had to develop them. And then there was only certain places that actually developed slides, and it was a rigmarole. And then, people look at your price when you go into galleries, and they're like, oh my God, this is so expensive. But what most people don't understand is that a lot of that stays with the gallery. Galleries take anywhere from 50 to 60% of the commission, so
they do.
And that's something that most people don't realize when you're trying to be a professional artist. And you mentioned, if you want to be represented by a gallery, you have to have a consistency of work that fills the gallery so that they can actually keep, having shows about you. You have to be able, people have asked me, why don't you do, more of that kind of life? I was like, because I don't paint like that. You have to be a very prolific painter and artist when it comes to that. And not that you're not continually working, but so much goes into one piece. You can't produce like that. So you have to know what kind of representation, what kind of avenue your individual work has to actually go through in order to be seen, to be able to be sold, and all of those things. And the struggle. I wanted to illustrate to everybody the struggle of the specific kind of artwork that you have, first of all, and then, selling it, getting it out there, all of those things. This digital age, we're doing a podcast now, this is one way to start gathering interest and things like that. Who listens to this podcast and sees it and then looks at your work. I already know somebody who I've already interviewed on the podcast. She's really a wonderful client of mine. She's got this gorgeous fern that we did on her. She's a yogi. She's gonna love just watching this and being like, oh my God, I love all the ferns. But yeah,
I love ferns because ferns are like a metaphor in a lot of my work, because this is about endangered species. I think I told you about that.
Yeah, you told me, but tell the audience about
I just can't remember what we've talked about.
Yeah. Our we haven't touched on what your expertise is, but this is a good time to tell them what your interests are, because I really think it's necessary. It's your work.
Well, so I teach art history. That's part of what happened, after I've been teaching art history for 20 years. And so that gives me the perspective of the long view. So one thing I think is that, and I was just thinking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. War, famine, pestilence, and The other one can never death. Oh yeah, death.
Death.
Right. He comes after. And so the reason I bring that up is because if there isn't any water, there's not going to be anything to eat.
Yeah.
Everything's going to die. Plants, animals, everything. There's going to be war because there isn't going to be enough, and it's death. So it starts with water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, why are we going to other planets and looking for water? You know, like
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it starts with water. And so this piece behind me, it's called The Last Plant.
Oh, I love it.
And the idea is that it was seminal to endangered species, that grass, so it's a weed. It's an image of a weed. Mm-hmm. Grass or like a dandelion or like some kind of weed that you hate is an endangered species if there's no water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because it's not going to grow.
Any of it.
All of the, you see there's brown all around it. Mm-hmm. And then there's this one blue plant. Well, plants aren't really blue, but that's a metaphor for the water.
Yeah.
So I love to choose old plants. So ferns, your friend, mm-hmm. Ferns are one of the oldest plants species.
Really?
They're ancient. There are fossils of ferns. I mean, there's ferns that are ancient.
Right.
There's some that are alive now that specific series is thousands of years old. And then, of course, you find a fossil of a fern, and oil is a fossil fuel. So you can extrapolate to all sorts of, metaphors.
Well, and it's funny because her tattoo, actually, it's of the fern, and it's also a nautilus and a fern because of the spiral connection they share and their journey to unfurl, like in their own. Yeah. So all of it, she's really into all of that. So she's going to love this.
The oldest species in the world is a quahog.
Is a what?
Quahog.
A quahog. Okay. Yep.
That's the oldest species in the entire world. I looked it up the other day because Jason Stapleton had in one of his daily alchemy letters, there was some quote about being, if learning to change species exists. I can't find the quote now. I wanted to make a meme out of it.
Oh, cool.
I lost the quote, but I pulled this image. I looked up what's the oldest species, and it was this. I saw this picture of quahogs, but I need to find this quote because the idea is like the ancient species survives because it's adaptable. Mm-hmm. So these quahogs, they're adaptable to everything. So that's why I can be where I am and be so happy.
Yeah.
And know that my work is important.
Oh yeah,
I know it is. In here, just the way your work is important, and that there's that. I don't have to justify it to try to convince anybody, because if somebody doesn't see it, then they have their own thing that's important. That doesn't make what I do less important. But it's taken years to understand that.
Well, yeah, because you had so many people saying that you were wrong. You know what I mean? Like,
there is that. Yeah.
Being like, no, don't do it like that. And you're messy. And that is super, that's super stifling. I really think that my first apprentice, we're not speaking right now, but I have a lot of, I have a lot of compassion for her, because when we started out, we both went to the same school. We both went to Micah for art, and she actually corralled her interest, like you, into teaching. And then what I saw of her coming out of teaching was this whole line of work that was gorgeous. I bought paintings from her. She got tattooed by me, and we started sharing what our mutual education had been. And her story was very different from mine. Right out the gate, I was always a person who just loved learning, and I loved just being a good student, and I loved trying things. But right away too, I also was kind of enamored with the classical ways of doing things. Like, I really liked those things right away, and I fell into them very easily as well. Plus my rendering skills were really good. So right away, that kind of connected me with people more, just because I could do that. So I got a lot more acceptance right away from my teachers. Whereas my former apprentice, who's now a tattoo artist, she had a lot more kickback. You know, she wanted to do things a lot like what you were saying, like where she wanted to experiment with things, and she wanted to dive into certain modes of creativity that her teachers wouldn't let her go in right then. You have to stay here. You have to learn this, and then we'll let you do this. So I think her entire life being an artist, she never was able to really grasp and hold that truth, because everybody kept stripping it from her. Everybody kept telling her that she wasn't what she should be. And it was really hard to kind of let her feel okay. Like, her apprenticeship was kind of rough on her, because what I was asking for finally was that she accept that truth, that she really, really, really lean into it. And she didn't understand, because like you had said about teaching, you have to prove yourself every second. That really resonated for me when you had said that. And I feel like that was something that she excelled in teaching. Like, she was a really great teacher. But I think that because now she had stepped into being a student again, and she was confronting a new mentor to learn another art, you know, these old things, these old demons kind of came up in her head, and where she was expecting me to be very like, you do it like this and like this and like this. And it was regimented, like, you know, teaching is in a lot of ways. That, and I'm a new teacher, I don't know what I'm doing. But like, she was like, you know, I feel like, you know, I'm not getting what I need from you. And I was like, but you have it. I can't give you what you have. That concludes part 1, diary listeners. Isn't Carol amazing? Be sure to go on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, find her wherever you can. She also has a website at carollebaron.com. Make sure to check her out. She does some really amazing things, and her stitch meditations are pretty cool. So go check that out. We'll see you next week for part 2.
Thanks for listening. You can find the Apprenticeship Diaries on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our IG is the_apprenticeship_diaries. If you would like to offer constructive criticism or an interview, drop us an email at theapprenticeshipdiaries@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from our listeners.